Sometimes the smallest sound can change everything. Ethan Harper whispered to himself as he trudged through the dense forest, snow crunching under the worn soles of his boots, a cold wind tugging at the edges of his red flannel jacket. Shadow, his loyal 6-year-old German shepherd, padded silently beside him, ears alert, amber eyes scanning the skeletal trees as if reading the hidden language of the woods. The morning sun barely broke through the gray sky, casting pale light over the frost-laden branches and glinting on icicles that hung from the pines like fragile crystals. It had been 2 years since Lily Dawson vanished, a little girl with sunlight hair and a laugh that once filled the streets of Maple Creek, and every local still whispered about the day she disappeared, the day the forest seemed to swallow her whole. Ethan had returned now not because anyone asked him to, but because Shadow had been restless for days, pawing at the cabin floor, ears flicking toward the northern ridge, growling softly at the unseen, a behavior Ethan had learned to trust more than his own eyes. The trail wound narrow and twisting, bordered by frozen streams that reflected the muted sky, and Ethan felt the old ache in his shoulders, a reminder of years spent carrying weight that was never fully his to leave behind. Yet there was a strange clarity in the cold air, a quiet hum that seemed to vibrate through the soles of his boots, as if the forest itself remembered every lost thing. Shadow suddenly stopped, nose quivering, gaze fixed on a copse of birch trees where frost hung like lace. Ethan knelt, brushing snow from his gloves, and whispered, "Show me what you see, boy." The dog stepped forward cautiously, pawing the frozen earth with deliberate care, then looked back at Ethan, as if confirming the path. Every step they took felt heavy with expectation, the silence around them both a comfort and a tension that pressed against the ribs. Birds stirred high above, the hollow calls echoing, and the scent of wet pine mingled with the faint metallic tang of ice. Then, beneath a fallen branch tangled with moss and snow, Shadow paused, low growl vibrating in his chest, eyes wide and amber, locking on something Ethan could not yet discern. He knelt, heart quickening, brushing aside the snow to reveal a small, delicate object half buried in the dirt, a ribbon tangled around a tiny bracelet, unmistakably belonging to Lily. Ethan's breath hitched, the cold air burning in his lungs, and he placed a hand on Shadow's neck, feeling the dog's steady heartbeat echo his own. The forest seemed to lean closer, branches creaking in the wind like whispered warnings, and Ethan realized that the smallest sign could lead to the largest truths. He rose slowly, eyes scanning the dim undergrowth, following Shadow's unwavering lead, knowing that every crunch of snow, every faint shift in the air, might bring them closer to uncovering the mystery that had haunted Maple Creek for years, the mystery that might finally bring Lily home. The path narrowed further, gnarled roots clawing through frozen earth, and Ethan's mind traced back to the day he had first met Shadow in the abandoned training yard, remembering the dog's instinctive intelligence, the way he had once detected dangers humans could not, and now, that same instinct was guiding them through the quiet winter forest, each step a careful negotiation with nature itself. Snowflakes drifted lazily, melting on Ethan's cheeks, and the distant call of a raven echoed through the trees, marking time as if the forest measured their progress. Shadow halted again, ears high, and let out a low, urgent whine, pawing at a dense thicket where the light barely touched the ground. Ethan approached slowly, muscles coiled from years of disciplined motion, eyes narrowing, breath fogging in the cold morning air, when a faint glimpse of pink caught the corner of his eye, a tattered piece of Lily's dress, snagged on a branch. The sight made his chest tighten with a mix of hope and fear, a reminder that even after years, the forest could still hold secrets waiting to be discovered, and that the bond between a man and his dog might be the only thing strong enough to uncover them. Ethan exhaled, letting the icy air fill his lungs, and whispered again, "Lead the way, Shadow," knowing that every instinct, every step through this frozen world, was carrying them toward a truth that had waited too long to be found. The narrow trail twisted deeper into the forest, shadows stretching long under the pale morning sun, and Ethan Harper adjusted the weight of his pack as he followed Shadow's precise movements, the dog's paws pressing against the frozen ground with deliberate care. Every step seemed to echo through the stillness, the crunch of ice underfoot mingling with the whisper of wind through bare branches, carrying scents of pine, earth, and something faintly metallic that made Ethan pause, breathing the cold air deeply. Shadow's ears twitched at every subtle shift, head low, nose quivering as he led Ethan around a cluster of birch and maple, their trunks frosted like delicate sugar, limbs bending under the weight of lingering snow. Ethan's eyes scanned the landscape, noting the slight depressions and broken twigs that told stories of deer and foxes, and yet there was a rhythm in the air, an almost imperceptible pulse that only Shadow seemed to sense fully. He remembered the way the dog had reacted in the desert during training exercises, how instinct could translate to understanding what eyes could not see, and now that same instinct guided them through the quiet wilderness toward the mystery they had been searching for all these years. A small glimmer caught Ethan's eye, reflected in the icy surface of a shallow creek that ran through the forest, and he knelt, brushing aside the frost to reveal faint footprints, tiny and hurried, that could belong to no one but a child. Shadow pressed forward with a low, careful growl, leading Ethan along the creek's edge, where the sunlight turned the ice into a prism of pale colors, scattering light across moss and stone. Each turn in the trail brought new sounds. The faint rustle of branches overhead, the distant call of a bird settling on a high limb, the soft sigh of wind moving through the needles. And Ethan felt his pulse quicken with a combination of anticipation and the weight of years spent carrying memories he could not forget. As they approached a bend where the trees grew thick and the light dimmed to a muted silver, Shadow halted suddenly, tail stiff, body tense, and began to paw at a mound partially covered by snow. Ethan crouched beside the dog, feeling the fine tremor under his fingertips, a subtle vibration that hinted at something hidden beneath the frozen earth. Carefully, he began to brush away the snow, revealing the corner of a small, weathered door, wooden and aged, almost lost to the forest around it. The air seemed to hold its breath, the silence accentuated by the faint dripping of melting snow and the distant murmur of the creek, and Ethan felt a surge of cautious hope. Shadow whined softly, stepping back, but keeping his eyes fixed on the opening, alert to any movement, any change in the forest's whispered signals. Ethan rose slowly, scanning the trees for any sign of disturbance, and then he noticed faint markings, carved into the bark of a nearby maple, symbols that might have been made long ago, perhaps a message, perhaps a guide. The door opened with a gentle push, creaking just enough to announce their arrival, and inside, the small interior smelled of damp wood, old leaves, and a faint trace of a child's presence, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably there. Ethan set his pack down and let his gloved hands trace the walls, rough and cold, feeling the history embedded in every splinter, every nail, every corner, as Shadow padded cautiously ahead, nostrils flaring, ears rotating at every sound. The room opened onto a narrow hallway, dust thick on the floor, sunlight filtering through cracks above and faint golden streaks that caught motes in the air, highlighting the small footprints that had been left behind long ago. Ethan followed slowly, muscles tense, breath measured, eyes alert to the faintest motion, and Shadow paused at the threshold of a smaller room where a forgotten toy lay half buried in the dirt, the fabric faded, the edges worn, yet instantly recognizable as belonging to the missing child. Ethan knelt, heart tightening, and touched the toy, feeling the weight of years, the echoes of fear, and the fragile thread of hope that had guided them to this place. Shadow leaned against his leg, steady and reassuring, amber eyes reflecting the dim light, as if confirming that they were not alone, that they were exactly where they needed to be. The forest outside remained still, the snow settling softly, carrying with it a quiet that seemed both watchful and protective, and Ethan took a deep breath, realizing that every instinct, every patient step, every moment of trust between man and dog had led them to the threshold of discovery. As he rose to move further into the room, the air shifted slightly, carrying a faint scent of warmth, of something living and waiting, and Ethan's heart stirred with cautious anticipation, knowing that the journey was far from over, yet that the first threads of truth had finally begun to unravel in this quiet, frozen place where shadow and light danced across the walls, guiding them forward into the heart of the forest and the story that had been waiting all along. The small room seemed to hold its own pulse, the cold wooden walls absorbing every sound as Ethan Harper stepped carefully, shadow moving ahead with measured precision, nose twitching and ears high, alert to every subtle vibration that the frozen cabin transmitted. The faint golden streaks of sunlight caught dust motes floating in the air, giving the interior a surreal glow, and Ethan could feel the weight of history pressed into every corner, every beam, every nail driven decades ago by hands long gone. Shadow paused at a low doorway, pressing a paw against the threshold, amber eyes scanning the shadowed interior with intelligence that seemed almost human, and Ethan followed his gaze, seeing the remnants of a small bed, the edges frayed and faded, scattered toys that had been abandoned, and the lingering scent of a presence that was both fragile and alive. He knelt slowly, brushing his gloved hand over a small patch of faded fabric, a blanket that seemed to hum with memory, and he imagined the child who had once slept here, the laughter that had filled the air, the wonder that had been snatched away by time and circumstance. The narrow hallway beyond opened into a slightly larger room, the floorboards groaning under the weight of careful steps, and Ethan moved with deliberate caution, aware that every creak, every subtle shift might reveal a clue or a sign, and Shadow pressed close, head tilted, ears alert to the tiniest sound. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, sending a scattering of snowflakes against the windows, and Ethan inhaled deeply, the crisp winter air filling his lungs with clarity and resolve. He noticed a small set of footprints, faint but deliberate, pressed into the dust near a broken chair, and a pattern began to emerge, a rhythm of movement left behind, guiding them forward, a map written in absence and silence. Shadow whined softly, stepping forward and sniffing a faint trail that led to a partially concealed hatch in the floor, the edges hidden beneath a layer of accumulated dust and debris, and Ethan knelt to inspect it, tracing the grooves with his fingertips, feeling the worn wood, the subtle depressions that hinted at repeated use. His heart tightened, hope and caution intermingling as he considered what might lie below, what secrets the cabin had protected for years, and the weight of responsibility pressed against his chest as he looked to Shadow, who gazed back with unwavering focus, a silent partner in this delicate investigation. With deliberate care, Ethan lifted the hatch, revealing a narrow set of wooden stairs spiraling downward into darkness, the air cooler and carrying the faint scent of earth and age, a hidden world beneath the visible, untouched and waiting. The narrow light from above caught cobwebs and dust motes, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to dance across the walls as he descended, Shadow following closely, paws soft against the steps, tail low and steady, and Ethan felt the old rhythms of search and rescue awaken within him, the lessons of patience, observation, and trust guiding every movement. Each step carried them further into the hidden heart of the cabin, the air still, the silence profound, punctuated only by the faint sound of distant water dripping somewhere below and the quiet shuffle of boots against wood. At the bottom, a small subterranean chamber opened, walls lined with rough-hewn boards and storage crates, and in the corner, a tiny blanket and a doll, worn and faded but unmistakably belonging to Lily, lay as if waiting for them, a tangible bridge between past and present. Ethan knelt beside the items, running a hand along the edges, feeling the delicate threads of memory, and Shadow pressed his muzzle gently against his hand, a grounding presence, a reminder that instinct, patience, and trust had led them to this fragile, miraculous trace of life. The room was silent save for the subtle hum of the earth beneath, the faint sigh of air moving through cracks in the walls, and Ethan stood slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light, absorbing the magnitude of discovery, the quiet miracle of presence after so many lost years, knowing that each careful step, each moment of attention, had brought them closer to the truth, and that Shadow's unerring senses had guided them here, into the heart of the hidden story waiting to be told. The faint light from Ethan Harper's lantern stretched across the walls of the hidden chamber, revealing layers of dust and the subtle impressions of objects long untouched, and Shadow padded silently beside him, ears pivoting at every creak and whisper of the floorboards beneath. The air was cool and carried the earthy scent of aged wood and damp stone, mingling with the faint trace of Lily Dawson's presence, a delicate perfume of warmth and innocence that seemed to hover as if the room itself remembered her. Ethan moved deliberately, fingers brushing the edges of crates and old furniture, noting the careful craftsmanship and the way the cabin had been maintained despite years of isolation. And he could feel the weight of time pressing softly against the walls, a quiet testament to the care someone had taken to preserve a fragile world. Shadow lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and let out a gentle, insistent whine, pawing at a corner where the floorboards appeared slightly lifted, and Ethan knelt, brushing away the dust, and noticing faint markings, small scratches that told of repeated movement, perhaps a child playing, perhaps someone trying to communicate silently across years. The chamber seemed larger than it appeared, a network of hidden cubbyholes and storage spaces revealed only to those who knew to look, and Ethan traced the lines of the walls, feeling the history embedded in every splinter and seam, the rhythm of effort that had gone into creating a sanctuary hidden beneath the ordinary. Outside, the wind swept through the trees, carrying the muted clatter of ice against bark and the faint song of a distant creek, while snowflakes swirled and settled lightly on the window ledges, casting tiny prisms in the lantern light that danced across Ethan's focused face. He felt a surge of cautious hope, the way one does when stepping onto the threshold of discovery, and he whispered softly to Shadow, whose amber eyes reflected the golden light, a steady companion, a partner in the silent investigation of this long-forgotten space. In the corner, a small pile of toys, faded and worn, caught the light, revealing a doll with matted hair and tiny shoes, and beside it, a blanket that had once provided comfort and warmth. Ethan touched them carefully, the textures fragile under gloved fingers, and he could feel the echoes of laughter, whispers of small footsteps, and the lingering aura of someone who had spent countless hours in this hidden place. Shadow circled slowly, nose low, ears attuned to any signal, and then stopped, fixated on a narrow passage concealed behind an old curtain of hanging blankets. Their edges tattered and soft, swinging gently as though inviting entry. Ethan approached, gently pulling aside the fabric to reveal a tight corridor leading further downward, the air cooler still, the scent of soil and aged timber more pronounced, and he felt the familiar tingle of anticipation, the sense that the next steps would reveal more of the story that had waited here, patiently, through seasons and years. Every careful footstep echoed lightly, each creak of boards a note in a quiet symphony of discovery, and Ethan could not help but feel the deep connection between himself and Shadow, the bond of trust and shared purpose that had brought them this far. Light from the lantern caught on faint markings along the corridor walls, almost like a trail, guiding them deeper, and the subtle shift in the air hinted at a space that had been hidden, preserved, waiting for the right eyes to see it. Shadow paused again, low growl rumbling gently in his chest, and pawed at a loose section of floor, eyes wide and questioning, as if signaling Ethan to look closer, to trust instinct over certainty. Ethan knelt once more, hands carefully moving the boards, revealing a small, shallow compartment beneath, inside which lay a collection of carefully wrapped objects, the edges softened by age yet arranged with intention, and he realized that this hidden cache, this tiny curated space, held pieces of a life long paused, pieces of Lily's world waiting patiently for discovery. The quiet of the chamber pressed in around them, still and attentive, and Ethan felt the swell of emotion rise inside him, the weight of responsibility tempered by the delicate promise of hope, knowing that the gentle guidance of Shadow, the patient, unerring instinct, had led them to a moment that would begin to answer questions that had lingered for years, the beginning of a path that might finally reconnect lost threads of a child's life with the warmth and safety she deserved. The hidden chamber seemed to stretch endlessly as Ethan Harper moved forward, careful to keep Shadow close, feeling the dog's steady presence as a grounding force against the overwhelming quiet of the space. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying the earthy scent of damp timber and faint traces of old fabric, subtle reminders of the life that had once occupied this secret space. Dust motes drifted lazily. In the lantern light, catching on the edges of forgotten crates and casting tiny golden flecks across the worn floorboards. Ethan's eyes scanned each corner, noting the meticulous arrangement of objects, the way small toys and scraps of clothing hinted at routines long paused, memories preserved in silence. Shadow's ears flicked constantly, his head turning slightly at the subtlest shifts in sound, and his nose twitched at every change in the air, guiding Ethan toward a narrow passage partially concealed behind a stack of crates. As Ethan approached, he brushed aside the dust-laden objects to reveal a small doorway, wooden and rough, its surface cold and solid beneath his gloved fingers. The faint echo of his breath mingled with the soft scuffle of Shadow's paws as they entered, stepping carefully over scattered debris. The space beyond was small and dim, a forgotten alcove filled with muted colors of faded fabrics, a delicate blanket, and a worn stuffed animal lying untouched on the floor, the corners curled and softened by age. Ethan knelt, brushing a thin layer of dust from the blanket, feeling the weave under his fingertips, the subtle impression of weight from years past, and he imagined the child who had once held it close, the warmth that had lingered here, faint but indelible. Shadow pressed his head against Ethan's knee, eyes glowing amber in the soft light, a silent companion affirming the importance of the moment. Ethan took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs, listening to the faint hum of the earth beneath the cabin, a gentle vibration that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the hidden life within. Moving carefully, he traced the edges of the walls, noting small markings, scratches, and faint imprints that suggested play, movement, and the quiet passage of time, each one a clue, a story fragment waiting to be understood. The light from the lantern caught on a small set of footprints, tiny and hurried, pressed into the thin dust, leading toward a corner where the floor sloped slightly and a faint outline of a hatch could be discerned. Ethan knelt, brushing aside debris, revealing a small compartment built into the floor, a hidden pocket of space preserved through years of neglect. Inside lay carefully folded items, a handkerchief, a small book with frayed edges, a tiny shoe, arranged as if to protect them from the passage of time. Ethan's fingers hovered over them, a mixture of reverence and careful curiosity guiding his movements, and he felt a deep connection to the invisible presence that had occupied this hidden chamber. Shadow sniffed each item gently, then stepped back, gaze unwavering, ears alert to any change, confirming the significance of their discovery. The room seemed to hold its breath, the quiet pressing gently around them, every sound amplified, the drip of melting snow from the roof, the faint creak of aged boards, the soft whisper of wind moving through cracks. Ethan stood slowly, taking in the space, feeling the weight of history, the delicate thread of memory woven into each object, each corner, each shadowed space. The subtle golden light of the lantern flickered, reflecting on the worn surfaces, highlighting the careful craftsmanship and attention embedded into this hidden sanctuary, and Ethan felt a swell of cautious hope, knowing that each step, each careful observation, each instinctive movement guided by Shadow, had led them closer to the living heart of the story that had been waiting patiently for discovery. Every breath, every quiet moment, seemed to stretch the seconds, elongating anticipation, and Ethan realized that trust, patience, and presence were the keys that had brought them here, into the quiet, fragile miracle of a space that had preserved life, memory, and possibility through the passing of long, silent years. The hidden corridor opened into a wider chamber, the air cooler still, carrying a subtle scent of pine resin and earth, and Ethan Harper moved cautiously, boots crunching softly against the old wooden planks, Shadow padding beside him with measured steps, ears rotating at every faint noise. A faint shaft of light broke through a narrow crack in the ceiling, illuminating a series of small, carefully arranged objects along the far wall, a row of books with worn spines, a tiny hand-carved chair, and a collection of delicate drawings taped to the boards, each one depicting a child's world with remarkable attention to detail. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the innocence captured in the sketches, the small, precise strokes of a hand long absent from the outside world, and he knelt to run his fingers lightly over one of the papers, feeling the faint texture of aged paper beneath his gloves. Shadow sniffed carefully, tail low but steady, and then nudged Ethan gently toward a narrow alcove at the end of the chamber. where a faint draft hinted at an opening concealed behind a stack of crates. Ethan shifted the crates aside with deliberate care, revealing a small doorway, barely more than a foot high, the edges worn smooth from years of use. A subtle vibration passed through the floor beneath him, almost imperceptible but enough to catch his attention, and he glanced down at Shadow, whose stance had stiffened, nose pressed forward, eyes locked on the opening. Taking a deep breath, Ethan crouched and pushed the door gently open, revealing a tight passage that descended further into darkness, the air cooler and carrying a faint hint of wood smoke mingled with the earthy scent of the forest floor. He lowered himself carefully, each step deliberate, muscles coiled from years of disciplined movement, and Shadow followed without hesitation, paused silent against the narrow boards. At the bottom, the passage opened into a cozy, low-ceilinged room, surprisingly warm despite the frozen world above, with a small fire pit at the center and the faint glow of embers providing soft illumination. Ethan's eyes adjusted quickly, noticing the careful placement of blankets and cushions, the tiny footprints pressed into the dust near the edges, and a small handmade toy resting atop a wooden crate. Shadow moved forward, sniffing the air and nudging a blanket aside, revealing a small, pale face peeking up at them. Ethan's heart tightened as he knelt, taking in the fragile features, the wide eyes full of wonder and hesitation, and he whispered softly, "It is all right. You are safe now," letting the words flow gently, carrying warmth into the silent chamber. The child blinked slowly, recognizing the calm authority in Ethan's voice, and Shadow nudged closer, amber eyes glinting in the firelight, offering reassurance. Ethan extended a gloved hand slowly, letting her make the choice, and after a tentative moment, she reached out, brushing her small fingers against his, a gesture of trust, delicate yet full of meaning. He moved carefully, wrapping a soft blanket around her shoulders, feeling the subtle tremor of relief in her frame, and guided her to a cushion near the fire, where the warmth and light seemed to settle the tension in the room. Shadow lay nearby, head resting lightly on his paws, watching intently as Ethan prepared a small cup of warm water, speaking quietly, narrating each movement so the child would feel the safety of presence, the certainty of care. The walls seemed to hold the echoes of long absence, but the chamber itself appeared to breathe with the return of life, the quiet click of Shadow's nails against the floorboards harmonizing with the faint crackle of embers, creating a rhythm both grounding and reassuring. Ethan's eyes lingered on the small details, the careful arrangement of personal items, the warmth of the firelight reflecting off the wooden walls, and he allowed himself a moment to breathe, recognizing the gravity of the discovery, the delicate restoration of hope and trust, and the quiet miracle of bringing light into a place that had waited patiently, untouched, for someone with steady hands and an unwavering heart to finally arrive. The chamber settled into a deep, calm quiet as Ethan Harper allowed his eyes to roam over every detail, noting the gentle way sunlight filtered through narrow cracks above, casting pale lines across the wooden floor and highlighting the faint scratches and imprints that spoke of a child's presence. And Shadow shifted slightly, tail low but relaxed, amber eyes scanning every shadow, as if keeping watch over their fragile discovery. Ethan carefully adjusted the blanket around the small shoulders of the child, feeling the delicate weight, and spoke in a soft, measured tone, narrating each movement, describing the warmth of the firelight and the texture of the blanket, creating a sense of stability and safety that seemed to settle over the room like a protective embrace. The child's eyes, wide and glimmering, followed each motion, tracing the lines of Ethan's face, the rhythm of his careful gestures, absorbing reassurance in the quiet cadence of his voice. Shadow nudged gently at Ethan's arm, sensing the rising curiosity, the cautious engagement of the child, and Ethan allowed her to explore the immediate space at her own pace, guiding her to the small pile of toys and drawings with patient instruction, pointing to familiar shapes and encouraging her to touch and examine the objects that had been waiting all these years. He paused to observe, noting how her fingers traced the edges of a faded drawing, how her eyes lingered on a small, worn doll, and he felt the subtle shift of emotion, the quiet thawing of fear and hesitation, a softening that spoke to the presence of trust being established in this hidden, isolated world. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall pines, the sound muffled through the cabin walls, yet still carrying a gentle rhythm, and the snow drifted lazily, settling over the earth with soft, crystalline patience, adding a serene layer to the already hushed atmosphere of discovery. Ethan moved to a small table in the corner, dusting it carefully and revealing a scattering of handwritten notes and sketches, a silent record of thought and play, the careful preservation of a young mind. And he encouraged the child to sit beside him, pointing out shapes, letters, and patterns, fostering engagement and the gentle restoration of comfort and familiarity. Shadow remained a constant presence, lying nearby yet attentive, ears swiveling at every whisper and creak, providing a tangible reassurance, a reminder of loyalty and protection, and the child gradually leaned closer to Ethan, eyes reflecting a mixture of wonder and cautious trust, hands exploring textures, shapes, and the small warmth of the blanket. Ethan's voice remained calm, measured, carrying a quiet narrative that wove together observation, instruction, and encouragement, grounding the child in the immediacy of presence and safety, and allowing the room itself, with its worn wooden walls and soft firelight, to become a space of healing, discovery, and gentle reassurance. The subtle interplay of light and shadow, the faint hum of distant wind through the forest, the soft crackle of embers, and the rhythmic, steady breathing of shadow created an atmosphere that was both secure and inviting, a place where the child could begin to connect with the reality of care, the certainty of protection, and the comfort of presence. Each careful movement, each softly spoken word, each nudge and glance from Shadow reinforced the emerging sense of safety, the delicate re-establishment of trust, and the profound quiet miracle of finding a connection, a space where the past and present intertwined gently, guiding them all toward the next step in a journey that had remained suspended for years, now unfolding in a chamber warmed by patience, attention, and the unwavering fidelity of a dog who knew instinctively how to lead Ethan to the heart of the discovery. Ethan Harper guided the child gently to the center of the chamber, Shadow following closely with a steady presence, the dog's amber eyes reflecting the soft glow of the firelight that cast gentle shadows along the worn wooden walls. The child, small and tentative, clutched a faded blanket close to her chest, and Ethan spoke in quiet, even tones, describing the warmth of the fire, the textures of the blankets, and the familiar shapes of the toys arranged around them, each word a bridge of reassurance across years of absence and uncertainty. Shadow lay nearby, head resting on his front paws, ears twitching occasionally, alert to the faintest sounds that might indicate movement or change, a vigilant guardian silently reinforcing the sense of safety and care. Ethan moved deliberately, carefully brushing dust from a low table, revealing a collection of small sketches, some depicting the forest outside, others showing simple scenes of home and play, and he encouraged the child to examine them, pointing out shapes and details, engaging her curiosity and providing a gentle structure to her exploration of the hidden space. The faint light filtering through narrow cracks above illuminated the room in muted gold, creating a quiet, almost sacred atmosphere, the play of shadows emphasizing the depth of the chamber and the intimacy of the moment. Every sound, from the subtle creak of floorboards underfoot to the soft sigh of wind through the cabin cracks, seemed amplified, creating a rhythm that matched the deliberate pace of Ethan's movements and the careful observation of Shadow. The child gradually relaxed, setting the blanket aside and reaching tentatively toward a small, well-worn doll, brushing it with careful fingers, and Ethan narrated softly, describing textures, shapes, and the stories that might be hidden in each object, allowing the child to experience the space with confidence and curiosity rather than fear. Shadow shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's leg, a constant source of reassurance and silent communication, and Ethan followed the dog's lead, noting subtle cues that indicated the child's comfort and engagement. In a corner, a small hatch caught the dim light, its edges slightly lifted, hinting at further hidden spaces, and Ethan knelt, brushing aside debris to reveal the entrance, feeling a quiet anticipation as he considered what might lie beyond. The air carried a faint scent of pine and aged wood, mingling with the softer, warmer presence of the child and the subtle trace of a life that had been carefully preserved within these walls, a space suspended between past and present. Ethan guided the child closer to the hatch, explaining each movement gently, reassuring her with calm, measured words that created trust and stability, and Shadow remained alert, muscles coiled but relaxed, ears pivoting toward any shift in the room's delicate balance. The child's eyes widened slightly as she peered into the small opening, and Ethan described what might be inside, painting gentle pictures with words, giving context and preparation so the unknown would feel inviting rather than frightening. The quiet intensity of the moment was underlined by the rhythm of breath, the faint crackle of the embers, and the subtle movement of the dog, all combining to form an environment where curiosity and safety coexisted, allowing the child to take tentative steps toward the next stage of discovery, supported by the unwavering presence of Ethan and the instinctive guidance of Shadow. The warmth of the fire, the soft light, and the careful, deliberate pacing created a sense of intimacy and protection, encouraging the child to explore, to trust, and to begin reconnecting with the world beyond the silence that had held her for so long. A quiet miracle unfolding in the stillness of the hidden chamber where years of waiting and hope converged. The morning light filtered gently through the narrow cracks of the cabin, casting elongated patterns across the floorboards as Ethan Harper guided the child carefully toward the small wooden stairs that led back toward the surface, Shadow close at his side, tail low and steady, ears swiveling at every subtle sound in the hidden chamber. The warmth from the embers mixed with the crisp scent of winter air seeping in from above, creating a delicate balance of comfort and alertness, and Ethan kept his voice soft, narrating each step, describing the feel of the wooden railing beneath his fingers, the texture of the blanket still wrapped around the child, the gentle pulse of reassurance that Shadow offered with every measured breath. The child's small hands clutched the edge of the railing cautiously, eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and lingering apprehension, and Ethan allowed her to take the lead when appropriate, guiding without rushing, supporting without crowding, fostering trust in the rhythm of movement. Each step carried them upward, the faint creak of the boards echoing in the chamber like a gentle signal of progress, and Ethan felt the quiet satisfaction of small victories, the patient unfolding of connection after so many years of absence. Shadow occasionally lifted his head, sniffing the air, nostrils flaring to catch the faintest hint of change, then lowered his muzzle, eyes glinting with awareness, signaling silently to Ethan that the path ahead was clear and safe. The light grew stronger as they ascended, revealing more details of the forest above, snow glistening on branches like crystal ornaments, the pale winter sun reflecting off ice-covered twigs, painting the ground with a soft, ephemeral glow. Ethan paused at the threshold of the cabin, allowing the child a moment to adjust, the cool morning air brushing against their faces, the scent of pine mingling with the faint metallic tang of frost, a reminder that the world outside waited patiently for their emergence. He encouraged her to breathe deeply, to notice the delicate sounds of the forest, the whisper of wind through the pines, the faint call of a distant bird, guiding her attention to the life around them, grounding her in the present and reinforcing the sense of safety that had been established below. Shadow nudged gently against Ethan's leg, then stepped forward, leading the way along the narrow trail that wound back toward the small clearing where they had first entered the forest, ears pricked, tail moving in careful rhythm. A sentinel whose instincts had guided them through uncertainty and now confirmed the passage to freedom and reunion. The child glanced up at Ethan, eyes reflecting trust and growing confidence, and he smiled softly, adjusting the blanket once more, letting her feel the warmth of his presence and the stability of the dog's constant vigilance. Each step through the snow-covered path became a quiet meditation, a delicate negotiation between caution and curiosity, the crunch of frozen ground beneath their feet harmonizing with the gentle murmurs of the forest, the cold air carrying with it the promise of safety and the gentle awakening of hope. As they approached the edge of the trees, the clearing opened to the soft light of the winter morning, pale and welcoming, the distant sound of flowing water from a creek providing a gentle cadence. and Ethan allowed himself a deep breath, feeling the weight of the hidden discovery lift slightly, replaced with the anticipation of reconnecting the child with the warmth and care of the world beyond. Shadow stayed alert, ears high, yet relaxed enough to convey calm, and Ethan gently took the child's hand, guiding her forward, step by careful step, toward the sunlight that painted the snow. In soft gold, toward a new day that promised safety, belonging, and the quiet miracle of a journey completed with patience, trust, and unwavering loyalty. The crisp winter air filled Ethan Harper's lungs as he led the child carefully across the snow-dusted clearing, Shadow moving with precise steps beside them, alert to every subtle shift in the terrain, ears swiveling at each faint sound from the surrounding pines. The sun had risen higher now, casting pale golden light across the undisturbed snow, each flake sparkling with fragile brilliance, and Ethan could feel the warmth of the moment settling over them, a quiet reassurance that the path forward was safe and certain. The child's small hand rested gently in his, the warmth and trust between them tangible as they stepped over low branches and frozen roots, moving with measured care through the forest that had held her secrets for so long. Shadow occasionally paused, nose low to the ground, tail sweeping in a careful arc, guiding Ethan towards subtle markers that he alone could sense, a silent partner whose instincts were unerring and whose presence infused the moment with steady confidence. The quiet murmur of a distant creek reached their ears, soft and melodic, weaving through the stillness of the forest and adding a sense of rhythm to each step, a cadence that carried them forward, away from the shadows of hidden chambers and toward light and openness. Ethan glanced down at the child, noting the wide eyes reflecting wonder and cautious relief, and he spoke softly, narrating each movement, pointing out the delicate patterns of frost on the branches, the gentle curve of the creek beneath its icy surface, encouraging her to notice the beauty and subtle signs of life in the wintered landscape. Each breath they drew seemed to mingle with the cold air, carrying a clarity and focus that sharpened Ethan's senses, his eyes scanning the forest floor for hidden obstacles, the faintest changes in snow indicating paths, markings, or disturbances that might tell a story of the hidden world around them. Shadow's paw nudged lightly against Ethan's leg, a reminder that instinct and observation had led them this far and would continue to guide them, and Ethan allowed the child to take a few tentative steps ahead, providing gentle support when balance wavered, offering soft words of reassurance, and letting her experience the rhythm of movement with increasing confidence. The forest gradually opened to a wider clearing, sunlight pouring through the tall pines, highlighting a trail that led toward familiar landmarks, and Ethan slowed, allowing the child to absorb the expanse, to feel the openness after the confines of hidden spaces, to breathe fully in the scent of pine, snow, and crisp winter air. Shadow paused at the edge, ears high, scanning for any subtle signal, and Ethan smiled, recognizing the calm vigilance of his companion, the unspoken guidance that had been the anchor through every step of discovery. The child took a deep breath, a small smile breaking across her face as the warmth of safety and trust began to take hold, and Ethan spoke softly of the steps they had taken, of the journey through the hidden chambers and passages, framing it as an adventure that had led to understanding, comfort, and the beginnings of reconnection with the world outside. The snow reflected the sunlight in a gentle glow, the forest alive with quiet movement, the distant call of birds echoing through the trees, and Ethan led them steadily along the trail, letting the child experience the gentle textures of snow, bark, and pine needles underfoot, each sensation reinforcing the safety, stability, and attentive care that had carried them through uncertainty. Step by careful step, breath by measured breath, they moved together through the wintered forest, the warmth of trust, patience, and connection settling around them like a protective blanket, Shadow remaining at constant alert, amber eyes reflecting both light and loyalty, guiding them toward the edge of the clearing, toward the promise of reunion, belonging, and the quiet miracle of emergence into sunlight, where the journey of discovery transformed into the beginning of healing and new trust. The clearing opened up fully before them, sunlight spilling across the snow in gentle ribbons, the air crisp and still, carrying the faint scent of pine and frost, and Ethan Harper guided the child slowly forward, hands steady, voice soft and measured, describing the textures beneath their feet, the sparkle of ice on low branches, the gentle rustle of wind through the tall pines that framed the open expanse. Shadow walked in perfect synchrony beside them, amber eyes bright and alert, muscles relaxed but poised, tail sweeping softly with each step, an ever-present guide offering assurance without words. The child's small fingers gripped Ethan's gloved hand, each movement tentative at first, then gradually more confident, tracing the lines of his hand, feeling the warmth and steadiness, letting the rhythm of their steps across the snow instill a growing sense of security and curiosity. They moved slowly along the narrow trail that wound through the forest, the snow crunching softly underfoot, each step deliberate and measured, as if the world itself were holding its breath, allowing the unfolding of this quiet journey with patience and grace. Ethan's eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, noting subtle shifts in light and shadow, the faint traces of animal tracks in the snow, the way sunlight glinted off frost-laden twigs, all while narrating softly to the child, explaining the small signs and rhythms of the forest, the way each branch and fallen leaf had a story to tell, the invisible language of nature that Shadow seemed to understand instinctively. The child's eyes widened with fascination, following Ethan's gestures, observing the glinting snow, the delicate sparkle of frost, and the subtle movements of Shadow as he paused periodically, nose quivering, ears high, alert to imperceptible shifts, guiding them toward an unseen pathway. Every breath they drew mingled with the cold, crisp air, carrying a clarity that heightened each sense, each sound, each subtle visual cue, and the quiet of the forest pressed around them like a soft, protective veil, amplifying the connection between Ethan, Shadow, and the child. As they approached a small rise in the terrain, the distant sound of running water became perceptible, the gentle burble of a creek weaving through the forest like a living thread, and Ethan slowed, encouraging the child to notice the delicate sounds, to feel the vibration of life in the frozen landscape, to understand that the forest was alive and responsive, holding space for discovery and care. Shadow nudged Ethan's leg, a subtle reminder that instinct and attentiveness had guided them thus far and would continue to do so, and Ethan allowed the child to step forward, supporting and reassuring with gentle hands and words that emphasized trust and awareness. The clearing widened further, revealing familiar landmarks, pale sunlight reflecting off ice-coated stones and branches, the creek tracing a silver path through the snow, and Ethan paused, letting the child absorb the openness, the warmth of light, and the quiet, steadfast presence of Shadow. Each step became a measured exploration, the child beginning to move with increasing confidence, noticing textures, sounds, and colors, while Ethan narrated gently, describing each subtle feature, encouraging curiosity and awareness, reinforcing the safety and stability that had been established throughout their journey. The forest seemed to exhale around them, wind moving softly through the pines, snowflakes drifting in lazy arcs, the distant call of birds echoing through the clearing, all combining to create a space where trust, patience, and the steady bond between human and dog allowed the child to begin reclaiming a sense of place, of wonder, and of belonging in a world that had waited patiently for their return. Step by careful step, breath by deliberate breath, they moved forward together, the warmth of connection, the quiet miracle of discovery, and the protective vigilance of Shadow shaping every movement, every glance, and every shared moment, leading them gently toward the edge of the forest where the sunlight promised a reunion with the world beyond, where hope and healing awaited. The sunlight spilled fully across the clearing now, illuminating the fine frost that clung to the branches and the subtle shimmer of ice crystals on the ground as Ethan Harper guided the child slowly forward, hand in hand, Shadow walking faithfully beside them, ears high, tail moving in quiet, steady arcs that spoke of unwavering vigilance and attentiveness. The child's small footsteps pressed into the snow, leaving faint prints that followed Ethan's larger, deliberate steps, and he spoke softly, narrating each movement, pointing out the delicate textures of frozen leaves and the gentle sparkle of ice, encouraging her to notice the quiet beauty of the wintered forest and the rhythm of life persisting beneath the frost. Shadow moved with subtle purpose, sniffing the air, nose close to the ground, tail low but attentive, and his amber eyes glimmered with intelligence, guiding them along a hidden path that wound gently toward a sunlit ridge, the soft sound of a distant creek adding a soothing cadence to the ambient quiet. Ethan paused occasionally, kneeling to brush snow from a small patch of pine needles or a low branch, explaining the patterns, the scents, and the small signs of wildlife that were subtle indicators of movement and life, allowing the child to observe, to touch, to feel grounded in a world that had once seemed uncertain and distant. The trail opened to a gentle slope, the sunlight catching on the icy surface of rocks and the tips of branches, creating a landscape that seemed at once fragile and enduring, and Ethan guided the child to pause, taking in the view, describing the layering of light and shadow, the way the forest seemed to breathe with the soft movement of wind and the faint trickle of water from a hidden spring. The child's wide eyes reflected curiosity and tentative excitement, fingers brushing along the snow-laden branches as Ethan spoke of the subtle wonders in nature, the importance of noticing patterns, textures, and the gentle signals of the environment, reinforcing a sense of safety and attentiveness, the forest itself acting as a silent partner in their journey. Shadow nudged Ethan's leg, a gentle reminder of vigilance, a tactile confirmation that instinct had guided them thus far and would continue to do so, and Ethan allowed the child to move a few steps ahead, offering support with careful, steady hands and measured words that reinforced trust and stability. Each step became a shared exploration, the rhythm of breath, the subtle crunch of snow, the faint call of distant birds, and the soft whisper of wind through the pines forming a quiet symphony that carried them forward with patience and care. As they approached the crest of the ridge, sunlight warmed their faces, casting long, pale shadows behind them, and Ethan slowed, allowing the child to absorb the expansive view, to feel the openness and security of the forest after months of isolation, and to trust the guidance of both human and dog. Shadow walked slightly ahead, sensing the subtle contours of the terrain, ears swiveling to catch imperceptible movements, and Ethan spoke gently, describing the colors, the play of light, the distant patterns of water, the sounds of the forest that were otherwise easily missed, nurturing awareness, calm, and wonder. The child took in the scene, fingers tracing textures in snow, eyes following the gentle curve of the creek below, and Ethan's voice remained soft, steady, and reassuring, emphasizing the gradual unfolding of discovery and the quiet miracle of presence, patience, and careful attention. Each movement forward carried both anticipation and gentle wonder, the warmth of connection and trust between them reinforcing the feeling of safety, the subtle companionship of shadow lending confidence, and the interplay of sunlight, snow, and forest creating an atmosphere of healing and revelation, a world suspended in stillness, yet alive with the promise of reconnection, belonging, and the quiet joy of emerging into light after a long, patient journey through hidden, secret spaces. The sunlight stretched fully across the ridge now, warming the frost-laden ground and painting the forest in gentle gold, and Ethan Harper stood with the child, hand in hand, feeling the crisp winter air fill their lungs as Shadow shifted slightly beside them, amber eyes scanning the forest for any subtle movement, tail low but steady, the dog's presence a constant reassurance of safety and attentiveness. The child's eyes followed every flicker of light across the snow, every sway of branches, absorbing the expanse of the world that had once seemed so uncertain, and Ethan spoke softly, describing the gentle patterns of sunlight, the shimmer of frost, and the delicate rhythm of the creek far below, encouraging her to notice the small wonders that surrounded them, to feel grounded in the warmth and stability of the moment. Step by careful step, they moved toward the edge of the ridge, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots, and Ethan allowed the child to pause, take in the view, and breathe fully, letting her sense of wonder grow alongside the quiet assurance of their journey. Shadow nudged Ethan's leg gently, a reminder of the vigilance and instinct that had guided them from the hidden chambers below to this open, sunlit space, and Ethan smiled softly, grateful for the silent partnership that had never wavered, the unspoken communication that had led them through uncertainty and now allowed them to witness the fragile, beautiful moment of reunion with the world above. The child reached out to touch a low-hanging branch, fingers brushing snow and frost, and Ethan narrated the sensation. The way the crystals melted slightly against her warmth, the way the sunlight caught the delicate edges, reflecting tiny prisms of light, and he encouraged her to notice the subtle colors, textures, and patterns, fostering curiosity and a sense of engagement that reinforced safety and trust. The forest around them seemed to exhale, the wind moving gently through the tall pines, carrying the soft, distant call of birds and the faint rustle of wildlife unseen, while snowflakes drifted slowly in lazy arcs, settling softly on branches and ground, creating an atmosphere of calm, attentive presence, and quiet awe. Ethan guided the child carefully down a gentle slope toward a sunlit clearing, describing the feeling of each step, the subtle change in elevation, and the gentle give of snow beneath their boots, emphasizing observation, patience, and awareness, and allowing her to move at her own pace while remaining connected to his steady presence. Shadow stayed alert, yet relaxed enough to convey calm, every movement precise, ears swiveling to catch faint cues, tail sweeping in measured arcs, the dog's instinctive vigilance reinforcing the child's confidence and Ethan's assurance. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the forest opening to a wide expanse where the sun glimmered on distant trees and the creek traced a silver path through snow-laden terrain, Ethan paused, letting the child absorb the vastness, the warmth of light, and the promise of safety, guiding her hand in his, and allowing Shadow to circle, watching with amber eyes as if approving the moment of emergence. The child took in a deep breath, eyes reflecting awe and quiet relief, the subtle smile spreading across her face signaling the first signs of complete trust and comfort after long uncertainty, and Ethan's heart lifted with the realization that every step, every careful observation, every patient gesture of guidance and reassurance, combined with Shadow's unerring instincts, had carried them to a space of hope, connection, and gentle wonder. The sunlight danced across the snow, branches swayed softly, and the distant sound of flowing water added a steady rhythm to the stillness, all blending with the warmth of their presence, the steady companionship of Shadow, and the quiet miracle of discovery, safety, and belonging, allowing Ethan, the child, and the dog to stand together in the golden winter light, the culmination of a journey defined by patience, trust, and unwavering care, a moment suspended in time where hope, loyalty, and gentle guidance had brought them fully into the embrace of the world above.